Hello, I'm Esther Armah. I'm the CEO of the Armah Institute of Emotional Justice. I'm joining you from Accra, capital city of Ghana, and so excited, so happy to be here on Just for Women Africa.
What inspired the emotional justice framework and why is it essential for racial healing?
I was actually on assignment. I was on a number of assignments in 1 year in Accra, in Philadelphia, and in South Africa. And whilst I was on assignment, I really, particularly as I was getting ready to go to South Africa, where they were doing the Truth and Reconciliation Commission headed by Desmond Tutu. And the thing that I realized was that the racial healing model that had been created was very much one that was about making sure white people were comfortable, that white people's anxiety and economy was okay and was comfortable. And it did not center African people. In South Africa at the time, Black South Africans were not centered. And it had me thinking about the idea of a racial healing that was actually about and centering us. Because we think of racial healing as almost about Black and white people. And I wanted us to have a model that said, how have these systems of oppression, colonialism, apartheid, enslavement, how have they affected us as Black people? As Black people on the continent? How has colonialism shaped how we see ourselves? How has enslavement shaped how African Americans see themselves? How have the two things then shaped how we see each other as Black people? So I felt that we needed something that was about us and that centered us, because the legacy of colonialism, the legacy of enslavement was all about the centering of white people. I didn't think that that was good for Africa, and it definitely wasn't good for healing.
Why do you think emotional justice resonates so strongly with readers?
My book, Emotional Justice, a Roadmap for Racial Healing, was an exciting, and honestly, it was a surprise. It was a #1 new release on Amazon for 6 straight weeks in its category, General Sociology of Race Relations. It went on to be a top summer 2023 pick by Stanford Social Innovation Review. We did excerpts in the Nonprofit Quarterly. That was a top editor's pick. Honestly, it was a surprise. And so I do think that the world of the emotional is really disrespected, it's disregarded, and it's overlooked. So we haven't thought about the emotional having a role in how systems function. We think about policy, we think about legislation, we think about politics, but we don't think about the world of the emotional and that it actually is a structural component of how you shape systems, how you maintain them, and therefore how you dismantle them. So what I realized was that I was giving language to something that people had feelings about, but they didn't have language about. And as anybody knows, in order to change something, you must name it so that you can accurately engage it. So I was able to name something that wasn't out there in the world before, and then break it down and give language to it. And it became a tool. So it was a tool that was being used by people in the world of, whether it's corporate America, international human rights organizations, social justice organizations, global philanthropy. So that was very exciting. I wrote the book for it to be used as a tool. That's exactly how it's being used. It's great.
What inspired you to create AIEJ and what is its core mission?
We wanted an implementation home for the emotional justice framework. And that is exactly what the Armah Institute of Emotional Justice is. It's a global nonprofit, and it is the home of this racial healing framework and roadmap. And what we do is we create resources and tools for organizations to use and to introduce the world to the emotional justice framework so they can use it to transform organizational culture. It's designed as a racial healing tool that is about transformational cultures, transformational organizational cultures, and transformed lives. And it's exciting to see it being used that way. We use storytelling. We use storytelling as a strategy for systemic change. And so we developed this international program We're based here in Accra, in Ghana, and we work as well in South Africa, we work in the United States, and we work in the UK. So it was really about saying, how do we turn this framework into a set of resources and tools that other leaders of organizations, other sectors in all the organizations, myriad sectors can all engage and use the work. That's what the AIEJ, that's what we do.
How do the challenges and needs differ from across Ghana, South Africa, the US, and the UK?
So for me, I don't see them as challenges. I see them as an opportunity for us to understand the distinct elements of Blackness. So often, what we do is that we collapse Blackness into one monolithic thing. We say Blackness is this, and that's the end of it. And the truth is, if you're across the continent, there's a difference between a Zulu and an Ashanti, and both matter to each group. And so it was about saying, can we find connection and community in this panorama of Blackness, as opposed to what really is an imperial approach? You create one thing and you say that one thing fits all sizes. It doesn't. It doesn't work. It doesn't help. It doesn't heal. So what distinguishes emotional justice, what's unique about that, is that we say each demographic has its emotional work to do. And what's exciting is to take the time and research and understand the specifics in South Africa versus the specifics in Ghana. So for example, if we're working in South Africa, even within the Black population, it's Black, but it's also colored. In America, that would just be all Black. That's how it would be described. But the distinctions matter to those communities in South Africa. Now, in terms of apartheid, they served to divide Black people, but the categories live on in ways that have to be addressed. And you can't really address what you don't name, what you don't categorize. So it was exciting when we are in Cape Town to actually engage these issues, because we've done the research. To be Black in Britain is not the same as being Black in America. The systems of harm and oppression that built them are the same, but the way they manifest is different. And so it matters. I was born in London. I lived in New York for almost 10 years. I now live in Ghana. I've worked in all these different places. I call myself a global Black chick, and global Blackness is the lens through which we do the work, and it's the way that I look at the world.
How has journalism evolved in telling Black stories globally?
Beautiful question. I think it's evolved in powerful ways. I think the nature of old school journalism was that as a very small group of people dictated the narrative on how we saw Africa. And that narrative was very invested in seeing Africa as a landscape of poverty for really the Black people, but a landscape of extraction for white people. And those two narratives were about preserving notions of a continent that benefited some and burdened others. And it worked. If your understanding and your relationship to the continent was only about poverty, we call poverty porn, distended bellies, there's nothing here. This is not a rich, powerful, beautiful culture. None of that is shown. Then it's not a desire to come back to engage and to create. And actually, the Black diaspora and the continent is a massive resource. It's not just a population, it's a resource of brilliance, of talent. So if that narrative was better understood, then what would end up happening is what's happening now. The narrative has expanded. Why? Because the landscape of journalism is completely transformed. Social media means that citizens can tell the story of their lived experience of the continent, whereas before that lived experience was not relayed, it was not communicated. You were in the hands of somebody else's notion. And so the expansion of the landscape means that you're being introduced to elements and parts of the continent that have just been unfamiliar. And that is an absolutely beautiful and powerful thing. The evidence of that are the huge numbers of people who are now coming to the continent to have this range of experiences. And with that coming, I think there is an increased need for us to engage racial healing between and among us as global Black people. But certainly, you know, I'm a former journalist with the BBC in London. It was a very narrow vision of the continent, and it was often dominated by people who were not African. And there is a rationale, there's a philosophy behind that. There's an investment in Black people only thinking about the continent one way. Meanwhile, white people were always coming because the landscape of extraction, the mineral resources, that Ghana is really the capital of chocolate, that cocoa is produced between Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire to the tune of 70-something%, that the Congo, without the Congo, there is no technology around your smartphone. It's critical. That the resource, whether it's the cowrie or the cocoa or the fresh food or the textiles, all of these elements are resources that make the continent the wealthiest place in the world in terms of resource. And what the narratives that journalism traditionally offered were about protecting Africa as an investment space for white and corporate entities, multinational entities, and ensuring the lifestyle, the vision of Africa was told as a place of poverty and lack to global Black people. The change transforms the experience. The experience shapes us as a people and is a healing, and is part of the healing that we need.
What themes do your plays explore, and how do they relate to emotional justice?
All of the plays are what I call emotional justice plays. So all the work that we do is about emotional justice. What we're doing is finding creative ways to connect to different audiences. So maybe everybody won't read the book. We mentioned the book earlier. Maybe that's not everybody's cup of tea, but they might go and see a play. The themes of the plays all reflect elements of the what ended up in the book. And so, for example, in New York, we did a play called Savior, which was about masculinity and the issues between Black men and white men when it comes to notions of masculinity. That's very specific to New York and the work that we do there. The play that we did in Accra was about the legacy and the toll of sexual violence and sexual trauma. We wanted to have the media and international human rights agencies understand the traumas that survivors of sexual violence experience because of the system and the way that they tell their story. And so the play that we did brought all different sectors, media, practitioners, people who do social justice, people who are interested in gender, all together to watch this play. So we called it Performance and Panel. So there was the performance and then there was the discussion. And it led to United Nations agencies saying to us, oh, wow, this is an amazing way. It's actually a training tool because it helps people understand things about an issue that they wouldn't understand, because we all connect to human experience, whereas we're only ever informed by data and numbers. So our work with the plays is to connect human experiences to these issues to help us better understand, in order that we can actually have the harder conversation about what does transformation look like? What does change look like?
How did your time as a distinguished activist in residence at NYU shape your work?
It was a wonderful experience. So the Center for Black Visual Culture is led by a phenomenal woman called Dr. Deb Willis. And it's also, its programming is really led by another phenomenal woman called Dr. Joan Morgan. So it was actually the first residency that I had ever experienced. And I just really loved it. It was a beautifully welcoming space. It was a free space. It was deeply supportive, and it allowed me to grow my work and build community, build connection that I continue to maintain, you know, to this day. It also is part of how I then managed to expand and get others. I'm a 2024 Soros Equality Fellow, and my project is on masculinity, and we've been doing work on masculinity for almost a decade in Ghana and in the US. So it was beautiful to get that that opportunity in that space. Residencies and fellowships are beautiful ways to expand the work and bring them to audiences that are not necessarily familiar with what you do, and actually enable you to present it and to sharpen the practice so that you're able to break it down and explain it in ways that are really helpful. I was also invited to bring emotional justice to the Bellagio Center in Italy, which was a joy and an honor. And again, present emotional justice to people who didn't necessarily know the framework, and were now being introduced to it. And that introduction leads to us expanding and building, places of engagement with the work. And I think for this moment, what we're very excited about is we're 2025 is the year of reparations declared by the African Union. And we're going to be bringing our focus on racial healing, which is part of repair, looking at it, and particularly in terms of Ghana, with our campaign, The State and the Stolen, and Africans Rising for Reparations. And so we're really excited to continue to build and grow our work. I would say we are a small but mighty tribe at the Amar Institute of Emotional Justice here in Ghana, in Nigeria, in Chicago, and in the UK. And our small but mighty tribe does visionary and innovative things in the world. And so we're very excited for that.
Tell us about any other project you are working on.
We have a beautiful project called The Story of Your Name. And The Story of Your Name was introduced as a way for us as global Black people to introduce ourselves to each other differently. That our names have been sources of trauma for some global Black people because it reminded them of the histories that were taken as a result of enslavement. What we wanted to do was to say that we now have expanded histories and lived experiences of Blackness in different parts of the world. So The Story of Your Name was about Black people on the continent, in America, in the Caribbean, and in the UK, sharing the story of their name, who named them and why, and then sharing with us who shaped their, what shaped their Blackness. And in these short, beautiful audio vignettes, you got an introduction to a version of Blackness that expanded your own and offered you additional connection that shaped how you see the world and was a healing for us all. So we're really proud of, and I'm really proud of what the AIEJ is building and continues to build as an African woman on the continent, coming up with solutions and healing and resources that the world can engage. I think it's critical because so often it's the world telling Africa what to do. In this space, it's us on the continent developing a racial healing model that different parts of the world are using. And so for that, I'm very proud.
What's next for you? Any new books, plays, or projects in the works?
So I'm very excited. I'm writing a new book, which I'm very excited about. I'm working on that right now. We are launching our first emotional justice short film. We'll be launching that in New York in April this year. I'm a Soros 2024 Equality Fellow. And so we're doing a masculinity project, which is going to involve my first outing of creating multimedia in a more expanded way. We've done it before, but doing it in this way is very exciting for me. And we're going to be doing longer form content in order to develop emotional justice as a resource. So I've written our first long form pilot. So you're like limited series that you would watch on Netflix or you would watch on Hulu or you'd watch on any of these spaces. We're creating series in order for us to explore the themes that we look at in emotional justice. So I'm very excited. The first one is going to be based right here in Ghana. Because I'm a former journalist, I'm kind of using media as the foundation to explore issues. It will be Black women at the center of these stories. It will be African women at the center of these stories. And that's my next, the book, the launch of the Emotional Justice short film, the longer form piece, which is a limited series, but the pilot is what we're going to be filming. So I'm really excited to be in this stage of creativity in the thought leadership of emotional justice and continuing to expand the audience in ways that are moving and transformational and healing.